The security cameras caught everything. A man in worn jeans and a faded jacket stood at the gates of the Whitmore estate, his fingers wrapped around the iron bars like a stranger looking in. The groundskeeper was already walking toward him, one hand raised to wave him off. "Private property," the groundskeeper called out. "You need to move along." The man didn't argue. He just stood there, looking past the manicured hedges toward the house where he'd grown up, the house his money had rebuilt, the house where his family now lived without him. His name was Daniel Whitmore, and 3 years ago, he'd been worth $42 million. Now he was testing something, or maybe he was just trying to understand something that money had never been able to answer. If you appreciate stories that dig into what family really means, take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. The groundskeeper reached the gate, squinting at Daniel's unshaven face. "I said move along, buddy. Mrs. Whitmore doesn't like loiterers." Mrs. Whitmore, his mother. Daniel nodded slowly, stepped back from the gate, and walked down the long private road toward town. His hiking boots crunched against gravel that his own contractor had laid 7 years ago, back when he'd first made real money and decided his parents deserved better than the cramped farmhouse they'd lived in his whole childhood. He bought them this land, built them this house, set up trusts for his younger brother and sister, hired people to maintain it all. And then, somewhere along the way, he'd become a signature on a check instead of a son. Daniel had started Whitmore Industrial Fabrication in his late 20s, working out of a rented warehouse with 2 employees and a dream about precision manufacturing. Within a decade, he'd grown it into a regional powerhouse, military contracts, aerospace components, medical device parts, the kind of work that demanded perfection and paid accordingly. But success had a way of swallowing time. Board meetings replaced Sunday dinners. Phone calls replaced visits. And the more money he sent, the less he seemed to matter as a person. The last time he'd come home in person was for his father's funeral 18 months ago. He'd flown in on a private jet, stayed for the service, and left that same night for an emergency meeting in Seattle. His mother had watched him go from the doorway, her face unreadable. "You don't even stay for dinner anymore," she'd said quietly. Not angry, just tired. He'd promised to come back soon. He never did. Then, 4 months ago, something broke inside Daniel. He was sitting in his corner office on the 43rd floor of a glass tower, looking at quarterly projections, when his assistant reminded him that his sister had called 3 times that week. He couldn't remember what she'd wanted. He realized he didn't know if his brother had finished college. He didn't know if his mother had recovered from a hip surgery she'd mentioned in an email he'd skimmed between meetings. He knew their account balances. He didn't know their lives. So he made a decision that his board of directors thought was a temporary breakdown. He stepped back from day-to-day operations, handed the reins to his COO, and told his assistant to clear his calendar indefinitely. Then he'd gotten rid of everything that marked him as wealthy. The watches went into a safe deposit box. The tailored suits stayed in his penthouse closet. He let his hair grow out, stopped shaving regularly, and bought clothes from a thrift store 2 towns over. The idea wasn't complicated. He wanted to know if his family would still want him around when he wasn't useful, when he wasn't the golden son who solved problems with money. He wanted to know if they'd choose him. Now he was walking toward town with a duffel bag over his shoulder and a story ready. He'd tell them business had collapsed, that he'd lost everything in a bad investment, that he was starting over from nothing. It was a lie, but it was the only way he'd ever know the truth. The walk into town took 40 minutes. The main street hadn't changed much. Hardware store or diner, small grocery. The bank where his father used to work as a teller before Daniel's money made that unnecessary. He stopped at the diner first. It was nearly empty at 3 in the afternoon, just a couple of truckers at the counter and an old man reading a newspaper in the corner booth. Daniel ordered coffee and a sandwich, counting out bills from his wallet carefully. He had $1,000 in cash, enough to last a few weeks if he was careful. After that, he'd have to figure something out. Get a job, maybe. The thought was foreign and uncomfortable. The waitress was young, maybe 20, with tired eyes and a name tag that said Becca. "You new around here?" she asked, refilling his coffee. Used to live here, Daniel said. Long time ago. She studied his face. You look kind of familiar. He shrugged. Just got one of those faces. She moved on to the next table, and Daniel sat with his cooling coffee, watching the street through the window. His mother's car, the sedan he bought her 4 years ago, drove past without stopping. He wondered if she'd even recognize him now. Daniel found a room at a boarding house on the edge of town. The place was run by an older woman named Harriet who asked too many questions and charged too little for the cramped room with its single window and creaky radiator. You looking for work? Harriet asked as she handed him the key. Maybe. What's available around here? Mill's always hiring. Pays not great, but it's steady. And Frank over at the hardware store needs someone for deliveries, I think. Daniel nodded. I'll check it out. That night, he lay on the narrow bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the radiator clank and hiss. Somewhere in this town, his mother was probably sitting in the living room of the house he'd built her, watching television on the screen he'd paid for, not knowing he was less than 3 miles away. He could have just visited, could have just shown up as himself and asked the questions he needed answered. But that wasn't the same. When you showed up with money, people treated you like money. They smiled and nodded and agreed because saying no to a rich man felt like closing a door you might need later. He needed to see how they'd treat him when he had nothing to offer. When he was just Daniel, not Daniel Whitmore, not the CEO, not the family benefactor, just a man asking to belong. He started at the hardware store. Frank turned out to be a weathered man in his 60s who looked at Daniel's soft hands and raised an eyebrow. You ever done physical work? Not in a while, Daniel admitted. Frank scratched his chin. Well, the job's simple enough. Loading trucks, making deliveries, stocking shelves. $8 an hour, cash at the end of each week. You interested? $8 an hour. Daniel's company paid janitors, 4 times that. Yeah, he said. I'm interested. Frank handed him a canvas apron. Start tomorrow, 6 a.m. sharp. Daniel spent his first week learning muscles he'd forgotten he had. His back ached from lifting bags of concrete mix. His fingers blistered and then calloused over. By Friday, he was exhausted in a way that no board meeting had ever made him, and when Frank handed him $320 in cash, he felt something unexpected. Pride. Small and fragile, but real. Not bad, Frank said, watching him count the bills. Most guys your age, they'd have quit by Wednesday. Something to prove. Maybe, Daniel said. Well, keep showing up. That's all I ask. Daniel nodded and walked back to the boarding house, his pockets heavier than they'd been in days, his body heavier than it had been in years. He waited 2 weeks before approaching his family. 2 weeks to settle into his cover story, to let the work roughen his hands and the cheap food thin his face. He practiced what he'd say, rehearsed the shame he'd need to sell. Then, on a Saturday morning, he walked back up that long private road to the estate. This time, the groundskeeper recognized him. Hey, you're that guy from before. The man's hand moved toward his radio. I told you, this is private property. I need to see Mrs. Whitmore, Daniel said. Tell her it's her son. Tell her it's Daniel. The groundskeeper stared at him. Daniel Whitmore? The one who? He gestured vaguely at the house, the grounds, everything Daniel's money had made possible. Yeah, that one. The groundskeeper studied him for a long moment, taking in the worn clothes, the rough beard, the tired eyes. Then he lifted his radio and spoke quietly into it. 5 minutes later, the gate swung open. His mother was standing on the front porch when he reached the house. She was smaller than he remembered, or maybe he'd just been looking at her from too far away for too long. Her hair had gone fully gray, and she was leaning on a cane that hadn't been there at the funeral. She watched him walk up the stone path, her face showing nothing. Daniel, she said when he reached the steps. Not a question, a statement flat and careful. Mom, you look terrible. He almost laughed. I know. She stood there for another moment, her eyes moving over his face like she was reading something written in a language she'd half forgotten. Then she stepped aside and held the door open. "Well, come in then." The house smelled the same. Furniture polish and the lavender sachets she kept in every closet. But something was different. The silence, maybe. The emptiness. "Where's Marcus?" Daniel asked. His brother should have been home from college for the summer. "At work," his mother said, moving slowly toward the living room. "He's managing the warehouse at Peterson's. Been there about a year now." "And Lisa, your sister moved to the city. It's a marketing job. She doesn't visit much." His mother lowered herself into her chair with a small grunt of discomfort. "None of my children visit much." The words landed like stones. Daniel sat on the edge of the couch across from her. "Mom, I need to tell you something." She waited, her hands folded in her lap. "I lost everything. The company, the money, all of it. Bad investments. Bad partners. I don't." He swallowed. "I don't have anything left." He watched her face, waiting for the shock, the disappointment, the calculating look of someone recalculating his value. But his mother just kept watching him with those steady eyes. "When did this happen?" "Few months ago. I've been trying to figure things out. Working odd jobs. I'm staying at Harriet's place in town." "Harriet's?" His mother's lips pressed together. "That drafty old house with the bad plumbing." "It's fine. It's where people go when they have nowhere else." She paused. "Why didn't you call?" Daniel looked at his hands. The calluses were still new enough to be visible. "I was ashamed, and I didn't know if you'd—" "If I'd what? Take you in?" His mother's voice sharpened. "Is that what you think of me?" "I don't know what I think anymore. I haven't been here, Mom. I haven't been anywhere but work for years. I don't know what kind of family we are anymore." The silence stretched between them. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked steadily, the same clock that had measured out his childhood in quarter-hour chimes. Finally, his mother spoke. "The guest room is made up, has been for 18 months, in case you ever decided to stay." Daniel felt something crack in his chest. "Mom, don't thank me yet." She pushed herself up from the chair, leaning on her cane. "You may have built this house, Daniel, but it's my home. And in my home, we earn our keep. You'll help with meals. You'll help with the garden. You'll be here, present, not locked away in some office or staring at your phone." "I don't even have a phone anymore." She paused, looking at him with something that might have been surprise. "Well, that's a start." His brother Marcus came home at 7, still wearing his warehouse uniform, steel-toed boots, gray coveralls, a name patch stitched over his heart. He stopped dead in the doorway when he saw Daniel sitting at the kitchen table. "What the hell?" "Language," their mother said mildly, not looking up from the pot she was stirring. Marcus ignored her, staring at Daniel like he was looking at a ghost. "What are you doing here? Did someone die?" "No one died." Daniel stood, unsure whether to offer his hand or try for a hug. He did neither. "I'm staying for a while." "Staying?" Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You haven't stayed anywhere for more than 12 hours in 5 years." Things changed. "What things?" Daniel glanced at their mother, who gave him a small nod. "I lost the company," Daniel said. "All of it. I'm broke." Marcus blinked. Then he laughed, a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. "Right, and I'm the Pope. I'm serious. You expect me to believe that Daniel Whitmore, king of the corner office, lord of the quarterly earnings call, is suddenly broke and living in Mom's guest room?" "It's true," their mother said quietly. "He showed up this afternoon, looking like he'd been sleeping under a bridge." Marcus looked at her, then back at Daniel. The disbelief in his eyes slowly curdled into something else, something harder to name. "So what now you need us? Now that the money's gone, suddenly family matters?" "Marcus." "No." His brother held up a hand. "You don't get to show up out of nowhere and play the prodigal son. You missed Dad's last birthday. You missed his last Christmas. You flew in for his funeral and left before the reception was over." "I had to." "You had to close the deal." "I know." You said it then, too. Marcus's voice was tight, controlled. Well, congratulations. You closed all your deals. You made all your money. And now you've got nothing. And you're standing in our kitchen like we're supposed to forget that you forgot about us first. He turned and walked out. A moment later, the front door slammed. Daniel stood frozen in the kitchen, his brother's words hanging in the air like smoke. His mother stirred the pot once more, then turned off the burner. Dinner's in 20 minutes, she said. Set the table. 3 places, in case he comes back. Marcus didn't come back for dinner, or for breakfast the next morning. Daniel learned from his mother that his brother had an apartment across town, a small place he'd gotten after he dropped out of college 2 years ago. The tuition money Daniel had set up in trust. Marcus had refused to touch it after their father's funeral. He said it felt like blood money. His mother explained over coffee. Like you were paying us to not need you there. Daniel stared at his cup. I was trying to help. You were trying to fix things from far away. That's not the same as helping. What's the difference? His mother set down her own cup and looked at him with the patient weariness of someone who'd been waiting a long time to have this conversation. When you help someone, you're with them. You see what they need. You do what you can, and you stay close enough to see what happens next. When you fix things from far away. She shook her head. You're just making yourself feel better. Checking a box. Moving on. I didn't know what else to do. I was building something. I thought if you could just get big enough, successful enough, we'd never want for anything. I know. She reached across the table and touched his hand. But Daniel, we never wanted for anything except you. The days fell into a rhythm. Daniel helped with the house, small repairs, yard work, cooking when his mother's hip was bothering her. He still worked at the hardware store 3 days a week, and the cash he earned went into a jar in his room untouched. He didn't need it. He had millions sitting in accounts he could access with a single phone call. But using that money would have defeated the purpose. He was learning to be present in a way he'd never been before. Learning the names of his mother's medications and when she needed to take them. Learning which floorboards creaked and which windows stuck. Learning that the garden she'd planted needed daily attention. That tomatoes ripened faster in the south bed. That she talked to the roses when she thought no one was listening. He learned, too, that she was lonelier than he'd ever imagined. That she spent most days alone in this big house. That the friends from the old neighborhood had drifted away when she moved here. That the fancy clubs and social circles his money had theoretically opened to her had never really welcomed her. I'm just a millionaire's mother, she said one evening, deadheading flowers in the fading light. That's all I am to them. Not Evelyn. Not a person. Just a backstory. Daniel knelt beside her, gathering the spent blooms into a bucket. I'm sorry. You didn't know. You weren't here to know. She snipped another dead flower head with practiced precision. But you're here now. That's something. 3 weeks in, Lisa came home for a visit. His sister had always been the diplomat of the family, the one who smoothed over arguments, who remembered birthdays, who kept group chats alive when everyone else let them die. She was also the only one who'd kept in regular contact with Daniel over the years, sending him emails he usually skimmed and photos he occasionally glanced at. She pulled up in a rental car, dressed in city clothes, slim pants, structured blazer, heels that sank into the gravel driveway. When she saw Daniel on the porch, she stopped mid-step. So it's true, she said. Marcus called me. I didn't believe him. Hi, Lisa. She walked up the steps slowly, studying him the way their mother had, looking for proof, for signs of the story he'd told. You really lost everything. Yeah, the company, the buildings, the jet, everything. She was quiet for a moment. Then she did something Daniel hadn't expected. She hugged him. It was brief and awkward. They'd never been a hugging family, but it was real. You look like you've been actually sleeping, she said, pulling back, for the first time in maybe a decade. I've been trying. She looked past him at the house, at the garden, at all the evidence of weeks of work and presence that couldn't be faked. Okay, she said. I'm going to go say hi to Mom, and then you and I are going to talk. They talked for hours that night, sitting on the back porch with glasses of iced tea going warm in their hands. Lisa asked questions he hadn't expected, not about the money or the business, but about him, about how he was actually doing, about what he wanted now. He didn't have good answers. He wasn't sure he'd ever had good answers. He'd been so focused on metrics and outcomes that he'd never stopped to ask what any of it was for. You know what I remember most about growing up? Lisa said, watching the stars emerge above the tree line. Saturday mornings, before you got successful, we'd all make breakfast together. Dad would burn the pancakes. Mom would yell at him. Marcus would steal bacon off the plate. And you'd just be there, laughing at everything, like you had nowhere else you'd rather be. Daniel felt the memory rise up, vivid and painful. That was a long time ago. It didn't have to be. She turned to look at him. Success didn't have to mean leaving. You made that choice. I know. Do you? Because the way I remember it, every time we tried to pull you back, you had a reason why you couldn't. An important meeting, a critical deal, a chance you couldn't miss. And after a while, we stopped trying. I thought I was doing the right thing, building something for the family. You built things, beautiful things, expensive things. Lisa gestured at the house behind them. But Daniel, we were never a family that wanted things. We just wanted each other. Marcus came by on a Thursday evening, unannounced. Daniel was on a ladder, replacing a light fixture in the entryway that had been flickering for weeks. He heard the door open and looked down to see his brother standing below, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Need help with that? Daniel blinked. What? The fixture. You're about to strip that screw. Hand me the screwdriver. Daniel hesitated, then climbed down and handed over the tool. Marcus climbed up, made a small adjustment, and had the fixture secured in under 2 minutes. You always over-tighten things, Marcus said, descending the ladder. Dad used to say you'd snap a screw head before you'd quit turning. I remember. They stood in the entryway, the new fixture casting steady light, neither of them speaking. Finally, Marcus exhaled. Lisa called me. Said you've been here almost a month. Said you've been actually helping, not just throwing money at things. I don't have money to throw anymore. I know. Marcus shook his head. I don't know how to feel about that. Part of me is angry you only came back because you had to. Part of me is just glad you're here. I could have come back any time, Daniel said quietly. I could have just shown up. I didn't need to lose everything first. I didn't know how. I forgot how to be part of this family without being the one in charge, the one solving problems, the one writing checks. Yeah, Marcus's voice softened slightly. That must have been lonely. Daniel hadn't expected that. He felt his throat tighten. It was, he admitted. I didn't realize until I stopped. But it was. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, There's a delivery tomorrow. Big order for the Hendersons' barn renovation. Frank asked if I could borrow the warehouse truck, but I'd need help unloading. You busy? Daniel looked at his brother, at the olive branch being extended, however awkwardly. No, he said. I'm not busy. The delivery took most of the morning. The Hendersons were an older couple who needed help not just unloading, but sorting. Lumber here, hardware there, bags of concrete mix in the outbuilding where they'd stay dry. Daniel worked alongside his brother without much talking, but the silence was different than before. Easier. It had work inside it, shared effort, the simple rhythm of lift and carry and set down. By noon, they were sitting on the Hendersons' tailgate, drinking lemonade that Mrs. Henderson had insisted on making, both of them sweat-soaked and tired and oddly content. You're not terrible at this, Marcus said eventually. Thanks, I think. I mean it. Most guys with office hands would have quit after the first hour, but you kept up. Daniel looked at his palms. The calluses had deepened over the weeks. His back had stopped complaining. He was stronger than he'd been in years. Not gym strong, but work strong. Turns out I can learn new things, he said. Marcus snorted. First time for everything. They sat there for a while longer, watching clouds move across the summer sky. I was really angry, Marcus said suddenly. When you left the funeral early. When you missed all those dinners and holidays and phone calls. I told myself it was because you didn't care. That we were just obligations to you. Things to manage from a distance. You weren't wrong. Not entirely. Maybe. Marcus picked at the label on his lemonade bottle. But now I'm watching you haul lumber and change light fixtures and sit with Mom for hours, just talking about nothing. And I'm starting to think maybe you just forgot. That somewhere in all that success, you forgot what it felt like to just be somewhere. Be with someone. I did, Daniel said. I forgot a lot of things. Are you remembering now? Daniel looked at his brother. Really looked at him, seeing not the resentful kid he'd left behind, but a grown man who'd been carrying his own weight, making his own way, building a life without waiting for anyone to rescue him. I'm trying, he said. I'm trying. The months slipped by. Summer faded into fall, and fall began its slow surrender to winter. Daniel stayed. He kept working at the hardware store, kept helping around the house, kept showing up in all the small ways he'd failed to before. He was there when his mother had a flare-up that left her bedridden for a week. He was there when Marcus's car broke down and needed 3 days of patient repair. He was there when Lisa came home for Thanksgiving and then again for Christmas, the first Christmas the whole family had spent together in 7 years. He was there, not fixing, not managing, not solving, just present, just Daniel. Sometimes, late at night, he'd lie in his narrow bed and wonder how long he could keep this up. His COO was handling the company capably. The quarterly reports that arrived in his email were better than ever. The money was still there waiting. His old life was still there, ready to take him back whenever he chose. But he didn't choose. Not yet, because something was happening that he hadn't expected. He was happy. Not the manic high of closing a deal or seeing numbers climb. Something quieter, deeper. The kind of happiness that came from knowing he was where he was supposed to be. He'd missed so much of his family's lives. He couldn't get that time back. But he could be here for what came next. The truth came out on a February morning, in the most ordinary way possible. Lisa had come home for a long weekend. She was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, when she suddenly went still. She said. Daniel. Yeah, is there something you want to tell us? He looked up from the eggs he was scrambling. About what? Lisa turned her phone around. On the screen was a business news article, complete with a photo of Daniel in a suit he hadn't worn in almost a year. The headline read, Whitmore Industrial reports record quarter as founder takes extended sabbatical. The kitchen went silent. His mother put down her coffee cup. Marcus, who'd been staying for breakfast more often lately, stopped mid-bite. Record quarter, Lisa said flatly. Extended sabbatical. Daniel turned off the stove, set down the spatula, faced his family. I can explain. Oh, I hope so. His mother's voice was dangerously calm. Because it sounds to me like you've been lying to us for the better part of a year. They sat in the living room, the same room where Daniel had first delivered his story of failure, nearly 9 months ago now. He told them everything. The burnout, the fear that they only valued him for his money, the test he designed without their consent, using their lives to answer questions he should have just asked. When he finished, no one spoke for a long moment. Then Marcus stood up. I need some air, he said, and walked out. Lisa was crying, silent tears she didn't bother to wipe away. His mother just looked at him, that steady gaze that had seen through every childhood lie, every teenage excuse. So all of it was a test, she said. Everything you did here. The work, the conversations, her voice caught, the feeling that you'd finally come home. That was you testing us. No, Daniel leaned forward. That's what it started as. But that's not what it became. I was testing you, yes, but I was also testing myself. And I failed. I failed the second I decided to lie instead of just talking to you. I failed every day I kept the lie going. I know that now. Then why did you keep going? Because by the time I realized what I was doing wrong, I was scared. He felt his own eyes burning. I was scared if I told the truth, I'd lose what we'd built here. That you'd look at me and see the CEO again instead of your son, your brother. I was a coward. You're right, his mother said. You were. She didn't soften the words, didn't offer comfort. She just said them and let them land. But Daniel, she reached out, took his hand. Her fingers were thinner than he remembered, more fragile. You were also brave enough to stay, brave enough to change. That's not nothing. How can you forgive me for this? I didn't say I forgave you. That'll take time. What I said is that what you did, the real you, the one who showed up day after day, that mattered. It mattered more than you know. Marcus didn't come back for 2 weeks. When he did, it was late at night. Daniel was sitting on the porch, wrapped in an old blanket, watching the winter stars when his brother's truck pulled up the driveway. Marcus walked up the steps and sat down beside him without a word. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Marcus said, "You should have just asked." I know. All those years of thinking you didn't care. And it turns out you cared so much you built an elaborate fake bankruptcy to find out if we loved you for you. Marcus shook his head. That's messed up, Daniel. I know. But also, Marcus sighed. Also, I get it. A little. When you're the one who has everything, it's hard to know if people want you or your stuff. Dad used to worry about that with you. Before you made it big, he used to say, "That boy gives so much, he's going to forget people want to give back." Daniel felt the words hit him like a wave. He said that all the time. He was proud of you. Insanely proud. But he worried. We all did. Marcus turned to look at him. You didn't have to test us. You just had to let us in. I didn't know how. You're learning now. That's something. The silence returned, but it was warmer now. 2 brothers, sitting in the cold, doing the slow work of rebuilding trust. I'm not going to lie to you again, Daniel said, about anything. I'm going to be here, really here, and when I go back to work eventually, it's going to be different, balanced. I'm not disappearing again. Okay, that's what I'm giving you right now. And okay, not forgiveness, not a clean slate. Just, Marcus shrugged. Okay, show me. Daniel nodded. I will. Spring came slowly that year, like it was giving everyone time to adjust. Daniel began the gradual transition back to his company. He didn't disappear into it the way he had before. He worked remotely when he could, kept his hours reasonable, flew back for meetings only when absolutely necessary. And when he did go, he came back. That was the difference. The thing his family had needed to see. He came back. Every time. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He helped Marcus buy his own house, a small place on a half-acre where his brother was starting to garden the way their father had. He helped Lisa start her own marketing firm, offering not just money but connections, advice, time. He sat with his mother for hours, just talking, just being, the way he should have been doing all along. He wasn't perfect. Some days he fell back into old patterns, checking his phone too often, letting stress sharpen his voice, forgetting to be present. But he noticed now. He caught himself. He tried again. That was the other difference. He kept trying. On a Saturday morning in late May, Daniel stood in his mother's kitchen, making pancakes. Marcus was stealing bacon off the plate. Lisa was teasing him about it. Their mother was sitting at the table with her coffee, watching all 3 of her children with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had waited a very long time for this moment. Daniel flipped a pancake, slightly burned on one side. "You're still not great at this," Marcus said. "Maybe," Daniel admitted. "But I'm here." His mother smiled, the first real, unreserved smile he'd seen from her since the day the truth came out. "Yes," she said, "you are." Outside, the sun was climbing over the tree line, casting long gold light through the kitchen windows. The old farmhouse they'd grown up in was just a few miles away, smaller now in memory than it had ever seemed in childhood. This house, the one Daniel had built, the one he'd almost lost the right to, was filled with the smell of coffee and burnt pancakes and the sound of his family's voices. He'd spent years trying to give them security, safety, comfort, but what they'd wanted was simpler than all that. What they'd wanted was him. And finally, at last, he was here to give them that. The camera footage from that first day at the gate still existed somewhere. Daniel in his worn clothes, looking like a stranger, being turned away from his own family's home. Sometimes he thought about it, about the man he'd been when he'd come up with this plan, so afraid of being unloved that he'd constructed a lie to find out. He wasn't that man anymore. Or maybe he was, but changed, worn down and built back up, like a piece of wood sanded and refinished. He learned that love wasn't something you could test. It wasn't a transaction, a balance sheet, a deal to be closed. It was messy and imperfect and required showing up even when you didn't have anything impressive to offer. Especially then. His family hadn't been perfect in their response. They'd been hurt and angry and slow to trust again. That was fair. That was human. But they'd also been willing to try, to let him back in, inch by inch, to show him what he'd been too busy to see all those years, that they'd loved him all along, not for his money, not for his success, but for himself, and that, in the end, was worth more than everything he'd ever built.